Hello, my name is Brian Cheatham with Get Cloud Savvy, and today we're going to talk about the mandatory enforcement of SharePoint Online and OneDrive integration with Microsoft Entra B2B. It's quite a loaded title, so we're going to cover what the heck that is and why you should care. So first we're going to define just what we're talking about here. What are we talking about? What is happening, why it's happening, and when it's happening. We're going to go through, I'm going to show you how this is enabled. We're actually going to do a demo in this video where I show you how this is enabled, how you check to see if it's enabled, and what is the impact to your users or customers. And really the impact is to the external user as well, right? We have to think about it from that perspective, but we also have to think about, your customer, your users or customers, and what the impact to the business is going to be. How do you assess the potential impact, right? So how do we know that something is going to be impacted? How do we prepare for the upcoming enforcement? So we're going to go through and talk about how we can report to do this assessment and what we can do to prepare for what is coming from Microsoft. Okay, so what does this mean? So I'm basically going to do a comparison here. A comparison to what we had originally, or you may have in your environment now, or your customer's environment, and what is coming, and what you probably should be using, but actually you should be using by this point. So SharePoint ad hoc sharing. So this is the original sharing mechanism for specific people links. So when I'm going in and sharing something, a folder or a file from SharePoint with someone externally, I'm selecting, and by default, I think it selects the specific people link when you type in somebody's email address. So when I go into SharePoint, I click share. I'm going to type in somebody's email address. That's a specific people link, right? When ad hoc sharing is enabled. There's no account required here. So we don't have an account in SharePoint. We don't have an account in Microsoft Entra B2B. SharePoint does have kind of a mapping table or what behind the scenes, so I guess you could call that an account, but ultimately it's just a one-time passcode that's sent. If you look in the upper right corner there, you'll see an example of the email that the recipient gets. And it's basically a code that they type in. That's the only authentication that's there. It's very difficult to audit, so on and so forth, right? So, and then along came the integration with Microsoft Entra B2B, which I believe as of probably 2 or 3 years ago, this was the default mechanism for new tenants. What Microsoft is going to do in May is they're going to force this, right? So we're going to talk a little bit more about that timeline here in a minute. So what this actually does is it creates an external user account in Microsoft Entra, right? So it actually creates an account in your Microsoft 365 tenant that's a guest. Right. So whenever you see those kind of long names, when you go into the admin center and you're looking at active users and you see something with a pound ext and all that kind of stuff, that means external. That means it's a guest user, right? So that's what those accounts are. So the beauty of that is we now have the ability to do MFA, conditional access. We have auditing capabilities and all that kind of stuff, right? The flip side of this from a user perspective, right, from an external user perspective is, we will want them to register for MFA and go through that process. So there's a little bit of an onboarding curve, if you want to call it that, with these external users. So that's why we want to document and all that. We're going to talk about some of that as well. Okay, so we kind of covered a little bit of this already, but why is Microsoft enforcing this? So Microsoft is enforcing this. It gets more secure, right? You can require MFA for external users, okay? And actually that is a recommendation. We want to require MFA for external users. So that means Authenticator app, external user configures Authenticator app on their phone, right? So they have to actually go through the process of downloading the Microsoft Authenticator app and going through and registering for MFA, right? It's a fairly quick process, but, if you think about it from a perspective of being that external user, there is a process they need to go through. So think about maybe creating user guidance documentation or even a video that you can send to these folks. Along with that, we have conditional access that can be applied. So once the external user registers for MFA and they sign in, we can actually ask them to accept terms of use, right? So now we have a trail, an audit trail of that user accepting the terms of use. So you can put all your legal language and all that kind of stuff in that terms of use document. We can actually create allow and block lists rules for external partner domains, email domains. So we can say, hey, this partner domain is allowed, this partner domain is not. So think about being able to have that capability now. And then finally, we have sign in and auditing logs. So everything that you're doing for your regular customer users, internal users, as we call them, you now have the capability of doing for external users. So this is great from an auditing compliance perspective. This is exactly why Microsoft is going this direction. So how about the timeline for this? So the rollout of this actually begins in May. So this May, that's right. little less than a couple of months away here. Well, I guess a little over a month away. They are basically, the option to disable the integration is going to be disabled. Okay. So that's all that's really happening here. So if you're not going to be forced to do something right away, I encourage you to, however, but it's basically saying that if it's already enabled, you're not going to be able to disable it. Okay, so that's kind of Microsoft's pointing the ship in a direction here. And then the retirement phase is actually when we'll have user impact. So that's when those legacy SharePoint ad hoc sharing links, or we call them specific people links, will receive some sort of access denied message when a external user is using that link. Okay, so we'll show you what that looks like. Sort of, we can kind of predict what that's going to look like. But just imagine if you have, it's your customer or your users, they have something that they've shared with somebody externally, and they're actively collaborating, and then all of a sudden in July, that collaboration mechanism stops working for those external users. Okay, so we've got to think about how to prepare for that. And then full retirement is in August of 2026. So let's do a little demonstration here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to know if SharePoint and OneDrive integration with Microsoft Entra B2B is enabled. Basically means, again, that we're using a guest account for those external users to access SharePoint content. Okay, I'm going to launch PowerShell version 7. I'm using version 7. And then from here, we are going to find the keyboard here. I'm going to import the SharePoint Online module. I'm just going to paste this command in here. Okay, now that's going to give us the ability to sign in, and we have to actually specify the admin URL here. Again, I'm copying and pasting because I will probably fat finger something. So you have to specify the URL, which is the admin URL for the tenant you're trying to administer. This will prompt me to sign in. I'm going to sign in as an administrator. This is a demo environment. I would be using phishing-resistant MFA if it weren't. Okay, and then I'm going to use the command get SPO tenant, and then I'm looking for a specific parameter, and that's enable Azure B2B integration. So this actually existed before they renamed it to Entra. Okay, so we can see that it's not enabled. So this is the way that you know that the integration is not enabled. That means it's going to be using SharePoint ad hoc sharing whenever you share, whenever an internal user tries to share something with someone externally. So why don't we take a look at what that looks like? So first, we're going to simulate the internal user sharing something with the external user. So I'm going to launch a SharePoint site here. And I'm going into the documents library here. and I'm going to share this externally shared folder. Okay, share. And then I'm going to type in the email address for the external user. Okay, it's letting me know this is outside the organization, making sure that I typed all that right. Okay, and then I'll just give it a little message here. Spare you the mistakes, my typing mistakes by copying and pasting. And I'm going to send, before I send this though, I'm just going to take a look at this URL behind the scenes. This is actually going to be a specific people link, right? So it's called a specific people link, people you choose. Okay, I'm going to send this. And then now I'm going to access email for this particular user, this external user, right? So this is the external user's perspective. And you'll notice that I haven't received an email yet. This is pretty typical for this sharing mechanism. And a lot of administrators don't know this is actually happening because it never gets reported to them by the external user. So a lot of administrators will assume, and internal users for that matter that are sharing will assume that these people are getting these messages, right? So I want you to think about that later on, how we want to have some sort of workflow or training of the internal users to send a separate message to invite that external user with more instructions, okay? So I'm just kind of planting that little seed for you there. So I don't have any way of knowing that something was shared with me, right? Because I didn't get the email. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to come in here and I'm just going to copy that link. So I'm going to go into Manage Access here. I'm going to go to Links, verify this is the link that I want. I'm going to copy that. And then I'm going to go back to the external user. Okay, I'm just pasting it in, right? So what we basically did there is we just copied the link and imagine that we sent that to the external user via email somehow or another, and we're just pasting it into the browser of the external user. Okay, and it pops up and asks me, hey, you received a secure link. You'll notice here, this email message or this prompt here, it's not an email message, right? It's a prompt, is actually coming from SharePoint. So this is the SharePoint ad hoc sharing. So I'm going to type in the email address of the external user. This is going to send a code to the email of that external user. So I'm going to pop back over here. And I've just got the code. And it's this long, I think it's an 8-character code. But you'll notice here, this came from SharePoint. This is actually something that came from SharePoint. If I say trust sender, we'll see that it came from SharePoint. So there is no involvement of Microsoft Entra B2B. Okay, I'm going to paste the code in here, verify, and I'm in. Okay, so we can see how that is not the most secure mechanism, right? This is originally how sharing worked. What we call SharePoint ad hoc sharing, okay? Microsoft is moving away from this. So now, when we fast forward to July 2026, what could happen? When we have this environment or whatever that's using ad hoc sharing, whether it's your internal environment or a customer environment, and these external users, what's going to happen, right? So basically what's going to happen is they're going to get some sort of message. Access denied, the link is basically going to stop working. Now, it's not going to happen right, as I understand it from what I've read, it's not going to happen right, on the 1st of July, 2026. It's going to happen, it's going to start happening then, right? So eventually somebody's going to see this. So we need to prepare for this. This is the impact. This is the problem, right? If we fast forward to July, you have a bunch of external users that can't get here. They're going to tell the internal users are going to come to you, right? So we need to prepare for this. So let's take a look at when we enable, we'll basically simulate the enforcement of the integration with Microsoft Entra B2B. And then I'll show you what this message looks like live, and then we will turn around and I'll show you how to fix it. Okay, so now we're going to go back over to PowerShell here. And what we're basically doing is we're going to enable this integration, and then we're going to see what happens to the external user's experience. Okay, so I'm going to go back to PowerShell here. And this time, we've already checked to see integration is not enabled, right? So to enable it, we're going to run a couple of commands here. The first one is I'm going to run this set SPO tenant. This will actually enforce the enable Azure B2B integration or Entra integration. So remember, Microsoft is going to disable the ability for you to turn this off in May of 2026. And then, they're basically flipping the switch behind the scenes later, anywhere from July to August. And then one other command you eventually want to set here, and this is just for future, it's not necessarily required, but this is nice whenever you pre-create these guest accounts for people inside the environment when they're sharing to be able to select them from the picker. So when you have a guest user that's created an Entra account will show up in the SharePoint interface. So there's a synchronization process behind the scenes to get those guest users into SharePoint so you can select them. Okay. All right. So give that a second to set. Okay. So we're good to go. So now let's switch over to the external user. Here's the original screen that we had. I should be able to, let me see if I refresh this. Yeah, I actually need to go back to the original link. So let me grab that again real quick. Should have copied that. Let me come in here, and I've actually still got the screen open. So again, I'm just copying this existing specific people sharing link. I'm going to paste this into the browser here. And there you go. There's a message that I was showing you before on the previous slide. This may or may not be the message that external users will receive in July. Microsoft says it's an access denied message. I don't know if it's this one or not. I just know that simulating this is what you get. So the external user is going to experience something like this. So imagine you have an active project going on where you have external vendors or collaborators, right? And there's 10 of them. 10 of those users are going to get this message, right? So this is something that we can fix ahead of time. It's going to require a little effort on the external user's behalf, and we're going to talk through what those are here in a minute. All right, so how do we fix these broken sharing links? So again, these are specific people links that were created via SharePoint ad hoc sharing. And now we're getting an error message because we converted to integrated with Microsoft Entra B2B. All right, so the first option is we can ask internal users to remove and recreate these specific people sharing links. Okay, so I know probably what you're thinking. Yeah, the internal users are going to be like, what? You need me to do what? So obviously we're going to need to instruct them on how to do that. And it requires that they're trained and they understand how to do this, right? We need to also provide them a list of the active sharing links, right? So there's a couple of reports, some different reports you can run to determine that, both a sharing link report that has all the different sharing links that are out there that are specific people, and an audit report, right? So we're talking about a Microsoft Purview audit report to show you who's actually used the links, right? So those are the ones that we want to recreate, right? The ones that are still in use, okay? So we can think of this as kind of a cleanup opportunity, right? To kind of clean up external sharing. Okay, so that's first way. Second way, we can manually create Microsoft Entra ID guest accounts. So same thing as really kind of the first one. We need to report to figure out which accounts we need to create, right? So whatever is actively in use, we want to recreate, or maybe that has been used in the last 90 days or something like that, right? So you're going to have to do some work here to get this information to determine which of these options you want to use, okay? So when we manually create the Microsoft Entra ID guest object, now the onus becomes it's on the external user to a degree, right? We have to get them to log in a certain way to where that sharing link will convert, or that user as part of that sharing link in SharePoint will convert from ad hoc sharing to a Microsoft Entra B2B user, right? This guest user that we're creating. So there's a migration process that happens at the time of that external user using that sharing link. So we're going to talk through that here in a minute. So you're going to see the experience of the external user. So let's dive into a demonstration. And again, what I'm going to show you is manually creating the Microsoft Entra ID guest. So we're going to manually create an Entra ID guest account for the external user that we invited previously that has the broken link, right? We're going to fix that link. And then we're going to show you what that experience is. And not only just show you what the experience is, I'm going to show you how I recommend that you do it, right? So the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to launch, go into Microsoft Entra, entra.microsoft.com. I'm going to go to users. And I'm going to go directly here. Now we can script this, right? We're just doing this manually so I can demonstrate. But I'm going to invite an external user. Okay, and the email address that I'm going to give it is the same email address for the user that we've already shared with. Now, on this display name, the nice thing about this, right, is I can give this any kind of display name that I want, right? I can basically tag or put the company name in here, right? So when people are using these in the future, internal users are using these in the future in the picker, the people picker, they'll actually see the display name here, right? And not just an email address, right? So it gives them a little bit more, I guess, context, I guess you'd say. I'm not going to send an invite, okay, an email invite. We're going to do this a different way. I'm going to show you how to do that a different way, okay? And I'm just going to review and send. This is all I need, just these two things. And now I have a guest user. You can just refresh this and make sure that it shows up in the environment here. It always takes a few extra seconds in Microsoft Entra. There it is. Okay, see, we've got our display name and the company name. Now, we didn't send an email invite to this user, right? This external user. So they don't really know that anything's changed. But this timing is of the essence here, right? So we have to get to them before they try and use the actual sharing link again, because if they use the sharing link, what will happen is it will create an additional user behind the scenes, right? So we need to kind of head them off at the pass, and we need them to use a sharing link from an incognito window, okay? I know that sounds kind of like, oh my gosh, we're gonna have to instruct all these users to do it, but what I recommend that you do is you just create an email message. And actually, I have it already typed out, so you don't have to listen to me type away on the keyboard here. But basically, what we're saying, right, is, and we can script this, right? I'm just showing you for demonstration purposes only. But what we're basically doing is we're sending an email to that user saying, hey, you have access or have been using access to an external shared folder, right? And we're actually putting the existing sharing link, the specific people sharing link in here. Okay, this is the one that already exists. So we don't have to remove and recreate this, right? We're pasting it in here. The trick to this is that the external user has to do this from an incognito window, or they have to go in and delete all their browser cache, right? So I think it's just easier to ask them to do this from an incognito window. And then this email is just formulated and says, hey, look, we need you to set up MFA. We're requiring MFA now moving forward, okay? So I'm going to send this. I've already got this composed. I'm going to send this. And then I'm going to switch over now. I'm going to show you what the external user experience is going to be like, okay? Okay, so there's the email. I'm going to open it up. And remember, I'm acting as the external user here, okay? So I'm going to take this link and I'm going to open this in an in-private window. This is the gateway, right? So the gateway is saying, hey, look, you're accessing, this sharing link. This is SharePoint saying verify your identity. So it's very important you understand this. So it took me a while to figure this out. this is the process that will actually convert the object in SharePoint from an ad hoc sharing object to a Microsoft Entra ID object that we created, right? So basically what's going to happen, right, is it's going to merge those two into one object, okay? Type in the email address of the external user here, and you can actually provide step-by-step guidance for them to follow while they're doing this. Okay, I'm going to authenticate. Now, this external user is another Microsoft 365 business user, right? So this is what we call a worker school account. So there is an authentication process for me to sign in to that other tenant, right? That external user is Microsoft 365 tenant, and that's what we're doing here. Okay, so this is the authentication for that. So I'm authenticating to the external user's tenant. Okay, now I'm getting redirected to the Contoso tenant, right? The tenant where the sharing link came from. And it's asking me to accept the permissions. I'm going to accept the permissions. So we're engaging now. This was a handoff. We just saw it happen from the SharePoint backend to Microsoft Entra. Now it's wanting me to set up MFA. And again, I'm setting up MFA in the Contoso tenant, right? In the tenant where this link was created. And I'm going to add, scan the QR code here. I'm kind of dragging you through this just so you kind of understand what these external users are going to need to do, right? But once they go through this process one time, right, it's set up on their phone. And you don't have to worry about it until that external user gets a new phone. Okay, so now we've added the authentication method, right? We've now got MFA in the Contoso tenant. Now, I told you about terms, right? This is where we're accepting the terms. Okay, this is terms from conditional access in the Contoso tenant, where the sharing link came from. And there you go, you're in. Okay, so it's a little bit of a process, right? The key to this is that this user, this external user, needs to do this, launch that external sharing link or that specific people sharing link from an incognito the first time. After they do that, it's converted. Their object is converted behind the scenes, and that original sharing link will work. So it is a misconception that these sharing links need to be recreated. However, there's quite a bit that goes into this, right? So I can understand why people just give up and say, hey, we're going to recreate these links. I'm just giving you another way to look at this, right? So you've got an option here, okay? How do we prepare for this? So we mentioned before that we want to run a couple of reports, right? The first report we want to run is basically a SharePoint permissions report. It's a report of all the external users that have specific people links, okay? That's the first report. The second report is an audit report. So we're talking about a Microsoft Purview audit report to let us know which external users have used a specific people link in the past 90 days or something like that. We're going to take the information from those two reports, we're going to merge them together, and we're going to come up with a list of all those sharing links and all the external users that have access to those specific people sharing links, okay, and have used them. And then you're going to determine how you want to fix the broken links. Okay, you want to determine what's coming, how to fix what's coming. So the first option is to recreate those sharing links. That is up to the internal user. The internal user is going to recreate those sharing links, right? So they're recreating that sharing link, which is ultimately going to create automatically guest users in Microsoft Entra, right? That's how the B2B process for Microsoft Entra works, okay? And then the second way is that we manually create the Microsoft Entra ID guest objects. So when we have a list of all the external users that have used in the past 90 days or whatever, a specific people link, then we're going to manually create those. We can do that with a script, right? But we don't want to send that initial invite, right? We don't want to send that because we want to provide additional language and instructions specifically saying, we want you to open this link in an incognito window, right? Or an in private window, okay? And then I want you to think think of this as a cleanup opportunity. This is your opportunity to clean up the environment, right, and start fresh. We have to communicate. Communicate. We as techs are not always good at this. We have to communicate, okay? And I say we as techs because that's, where I started, and I had to learn to communicate. So we want to send communications to internal staff. And I would even say, in addition to an email message, right, we have some sort of call with them to let them know what's happening and what's coming. And then we want to communicate with those external users. So like the method that I showed you in the previous demo, we want to provide them guidance and give them, hey, you need to go down this path. If you don't go down this path, right, you're going to have problems. And then finally, it's very important. This is really, I think, probably one of the most important things. We have to train people on how to use SharePoint sharing, right? And I would say for this process, right, we want to develop specific guidance. I would even say if you can put it in a user guide or a video or something like that, put the video out on YouTube. Those external users can use that as a reference. That's probably a good idea. You saw what we just had to go through to get the external user over the hump. And then I think this is just as important as anything else. We want to train, probably most important, we want to train internal staff on how to use external sharing and the external sharing methods that are available to them. So there is still an anyone link that people can use. So if it's just a short term, we want to set expiration like that on that link, and it's not sensitive information or something that we're worried about, like intellectual property or any of that kind of stuff, right? We can teach them how to use and just share an external link, right? Or an anyone link. And that anyone link, right, there's no authentication there, right? It's just anybody that has that link can use it. And you can expire that, which is what I recommend. And then the other thing is to basically coach them through the specific people sharing link process moving forward, and even encouraging them and maybe even, enforcing that, hey, whenever you do this, please send a second email and here's the template, right? And that template would include the instructions to the external user on how to set up MFA and all that kind of stuff. Because at the end of the day, we want the users to self-service as much as possible. One, to where they can get to work, and get things done and not be, interrupted by issues with computers and things like that. But two, we're probably saving a help desk call, right? So think about it both ways. But very important, I want you to take this slide or whatever and study it and learn it, because this is how you're going to get through this process. And that concludes the video. I hope this was helpful to you. If it was helpful to you, I please ask that you either share it, kind of spread the word. And if you do need help with anything, please feel to reach out. My website address is on the screen there. And you can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on Twitter or X or whatever the heck they're calling it now. And my website is, getcloudsavvy.com. Thank you.